stay closed. There's some seats over here on the other side of this room. Okay. Alright, so when we got here tonight, we got in a bit late. The chairs weren't set up as usual, and Phil and Theo came in, and they were thinking it's going to be a small, intimate talk tonight. They hadn't seen any of the photos or videos of Koi and how many of us come each week, so I don't know if they're a bit surprised or shocked tonight at the number, but hopefully we can still have that personal and intimate discussion, so Kiriko and Katerina, they're together, they're married, and they have 4 kids, right?
Well, I have 6 now.
6?
Two new ones.
Oh, okay, two new ones, okay. So 2 of the kids are married, and there's father Stuffios that we all know. There's, well, now we all know from his appearance on TV, and we've promoted him, I guess, through our reel. And I got a lot of feedback, a lot of good feedback. So I don't know if anyone's seen the reel with Father Stuffios from Monasticism, but it's their son, and yeah, he gave us a little glimpse into his life. But tonight, I just want to see if we can have a glimpse into your lives and how you ended up in church and together and in this marriage in Christ, So if either of you want to start, like a bit of background on maybe how you got into church, you grew up in the church, was there any events that influenced you to become practicing Orthodox Christians, or a little background.
Because I'm not a good speaker, I prepared some things. I can write okay. So, let's see. As you may know, just a bit of trivia, St. Anthony the Great would not teach in the presence of the priest because unless the priest told him to. Because then you should. No, it was a bad thing. Okay, God loves each of us as a unique creation. Each of us is different to each other. And at times, if we look back on our lives, by the way, I'm 63, Ekaterina is, 62 and 60, sorry. We'll be 63 and 61 this year. If we want to look back at our lives, we can see all the blessings we were showered with. A few of them we acknowledge and we use, and the majority go by. We don't realize them. Maybe we'll realize them sometime later. We all build on whatever is the culture in our family. So both of us happen to have pious grandparents and parents. I'm going to lose it again. I stupidly left the church, at least not attending church, between the ages of 14 and 18. And this machine we have here, it can only process by itself what we put into it. So if there's no involvement with the church, it's easy to pull away. And I remember thinking of the church as a means of social cohesion amongst Greeks, good place to be, to network and so on. It may still be for some people, but that wasn't for me. If I was to base my life, and I knew life in the church had to be a way of life. I needed something much more than that. So unfortunately, my foolishness during my teenage years yeah, I wasn't, at least in my mind, in the church. Maybe other people didn't realize that I wasn't in the church. I was a compulsory church attendant for the old limosino, for the old wedding, and Pascha and Christmas. And my first experience, like afterwards in church, was in this area about here. If you were to imagine this 40, 78, 29, so that's 44 years ago. This was the site of the old church, you know, as a house. That's what this church was at Cobra. It was a small house, suburban house, and that's where the church was. They knocked down some walls. And I remember I used to come sheepishly to church. One of the good things from the beginning is that I used to come from the beginning of the church, of the service. So Orthros was, again, something you get from your parents, but Dad used to always go to church from the very beginning. So I just copied that. I knew church didn't start at 9 o'clock, it started at 7:30. Okay. And I'll just say one small thing about people that you only see the blessing later on in our lives. There was a lady here, I will say her name, she's on the other side now. I hope we get where she is. Anyway, her name was Evangelia Kakagios, and she used to stand at the back of the church against the wall behind the last pew that was there. And again, small things impress people. I was impressed by the way she just stood there. She was maybe in her 70s at the time, and she would take off her shoes, which I thought at the time was, hey, it's okay, it's summertime. But then when it was winter, she would still take them off. And then I realized that maybe she actually was in God's presence. And just like at Mount Sinai, I never asked her what the reason was, but she would stand in the cold like that. But the main thing was that I realized back then was that some people in the church realize in the services, realize that we're in God's presence. And that's a big thing. Another example of a person who I knew was in God's presence, another old lady, she was a bit older. In fact, in the 10 years I knew her, she was 84, she used to tell me when she was 84. Even 10 years later, she was still 84, so I'm not sure quite how old she was. Her name was Iakrisi Zanetidis. And she was, I used to be, what's the word, a church groupie by then. So I would go to all the churches in Sydney, and Father Nectarios, who recently retired after serving at Marrickville and then at Newtown, he had an all-night vigil, and Yaya somehow I knew her by then, and she asked me to give her a lift, so I went there, and during the service she used to do continuous prostrations. So if you can imagine how easy it is for you guys to do prostrations for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. Imagine when you're 84 plus, doing prostrations for the entire service. I'll tell you afterwards why she was doing prostrations. Maybe I should say it now. So what happened is that after the all-night vigil, they finished at about 1:30, we ended up, she told me, tomorrow is a holiday, so I haven't seen Padre Multiadi for a while, so let's go to Padre Multiadi. He said, yeah, it's 2 o'clock, we've just been, 7 hours here, whatever it was. Okay, get up a pam. Thanks. So we went to Rose Bay, and I slept in the car for 3 hours, and then she woke me up because Manoli, the chanter and the person who would light all the vigil lamps, he came. She said, let's go and help him. So I went there. So I was helping Padre Multiadi inside, and this is the answer to why she was making prostrations all the time. At the end of the service, our Padre asked me to do the after communion prayers while he was finishing off the consuming the remains of the Holy Communion, as all priests do. And then towards the end, as we were just saying, we prayed to Panagia, we heard somebody crying at the door outside. So we finished, and then he told me, have a look who it is. So then I went to see who it was. It was the and then she said, Papamu, they say now it's Paschalia. It's the period after Pascha, and it's somebody coming to making prostrations in church in public worship. And they're right. I know that rule. But I can't do otherwise, because if I stand, after a while, she had a bit of Parkinson's, I'm going to end up falling flat on my face, and I'm going to inconvenience, that's the word she used in Greek, and I'm going to inconvenience you to run me off to the hospitals. And then Padre Mathias said to her, yeah, maybe you should sit a bit. And then she said, in Cypriot, Papamu, how is it possible? How can I sit before God? And then Padre Mathias wisely gave her that's the reason why she was making prostrations. And Padre Mathias gave her the wise words, which was, Yaya, this, by the way, anyone who's not Greek, Yaya is grandmother. Yaya, this rule is true, it's there, but it's not for you, it's for us. Okay. That was a very wise saying to her. This lady, by the way, the one that was in God's presence at church, during services, at her funeral, the Archbishop who served during the funeral service said to everyone how she was his support, stirigma, support, word. The person he would go to for support nearly every week in the first couple of years when he first came here, when he felt the loneliness and the difficulty of organizing the church back then, because it was quite a difficult time. So, and such was this person that was in the presence of God in church. So, I just want to give those two examples about, and you look at these things, maybe at the time you don't realize them, but afterwards you realize that it's important to be in the presence of such people, to realize that at church it's not just we're before God. Okay. And so one of them was about there, but where the steps are, that's where Kyria Evangelia would stand, but 5 meters down and 40 years ago. Now, I might ask you to get in now.
Yeah. I just want to ask quickly before you come to Theo, when you turned 18, like you said, it was 14 to 18, you weren't in the church. You went through those teenage years, like most of us do, I guess, and you pursue your own interests and passions, I suppose. What eventually brought you back, if you can say, to church? Was it just like you woke up one morning and
No, it wasn't waking up one morning. I was forced to go, as I said, I went to go for social occasions. So there was a mnemosino at one of the churches of the Domitian of the Virgin Mary in Redfern. I was forced to go because it was a family event. And afterwards I bought the book called The Orthodox Church by Bishop Kallistos Ware, of blessed memory. Have you come across that book? Okay, it was one of the most well-known books. It was published in 1963, somewhere there, by Penguin Press, which is an international press. So it had a very widespread circulation at the time. Probably the most read book 40 years ago of the Orthodox, by English speakers. And it's a challenging book, but obviously I was hungry and thirsty enough that I finished the book before I went to sleep. So I skipped lunch and dinner and just kept reading. Okay, it's pretty hard for me to skip lunch and dinner, by the way. I struggle with gluttony. But such was the the thirst and the hunger. About the same time, it was a case of, I met Father Miltiadis at fellowship, I started going to uni, and Father Miltiadis was running a fellowship there, uni students, so I used to go there. But then I became, as I said, quite hungry, so I used to go to all the fellowships in Sydney. St. Spiridon, I used to go to Monasticism for a while as well. And then St. George, and I even used to go to the Russian fellowship at Russian church at Kabramata. So the previous priest at Kabramata, Father Rostislav Gan of blessed memory, he was the confessor, spiritual father of a number of Greek and Antiochian priests at that time. And so it was good to. So I've always had this sense, because of that experience and because Bishop Callistos approaches the church from, he was the first, as you know, he was the first born English by race bishop in the last 1,000 years. Okay? And so he speaks from that sort of international sort of background. Like one of the things to me, and I hope you know this sort of unusual fact, that Greeks are about 10% of the Greek Orthodox. 90% everyone else. Slavs, Middle Easterners, and so on. And now increasingly Western ones. But so only about 10%. And sorry.
That book was a bad influence for you.
Yes.
So it's called the Orthodox Church, Bishop Callistos.
But now there's a lot more, perhaps easier books to get into. As long as we have the hunger and the thirst, God will find ways.
Yeah, beautiful. And yourself, Thea, how are you doing? What was your journey?
Thank you for asking us to come today, by the way. I did think it was going to be an intimate little group of wonderful young people, so...
Sorry to disappoint.
No, it's very pleasing and very moving, actually, so I'm really happy to see all your beautiful faces. Anyway, Kyriakos being a little bit modest, that book is actually a really difficult book to read, and it's got very tiny writing, and it's very historic, and he didn't sleep that night. I think he went like through
No, he slept.
Oh, he did sleep.
11:30 finished.
Anyway, after that, I think Kyriakos became, as we were saying before, sometimes when we are moved by God, there's always a danger of becoming fanatical. So we have to have a spiritual father to guide us. And I don't know if I should be saying this, but at the time, Kyriakos actually went to Monasticism and was determined to become a monk, and went to the monastery, went to a Monasticism where
No, it's not Monasticism.
where
One of the monasteries in Monasticism.
and met Yeronda Yosef, who was the spiritual son of St. Joseph Lysichastin, who later became Yeronda. But anyway, he told him, Kyriakos, pack up your bags and stay as long as you want, but you're not going to stay here with us. So he came back to Australia quite disappointed, no doubt. But anyway, that was before I had ever met Kyriakos.
But it's important that I knew I wasn't to be a monk, as Yolanda had said, because I remember this scene as the boat was leaving Mount Athos. I felt no attachment to Mount Athos. Okay? I was just comfortable with monks, which I thought was unusual at the time, because there was no monks in Australia, and except for the Russians, and maybe at Rose Bay, there wasn't much sort of warmth towards monastics at the time. And so I thought maybe I'm meant to be monk since I'm interested in like monks. But it is normal to be comfortable with monastics. Yes.
Yeah, I'll just mention quickly for anyone doesn't know, Mount Athos is like it's a monastic republic, I guess, in Greece. I think a few of you know, but it's like a male-only peninsula pretty much, with like over 29 monasteries, some Russian, Serbian, but mostly Greek. That's where Kiriakou went at that time. And Elder Joseph, is that Elder Joseph, is it? Yeah, on that now, part of it. Oh, okay.
He's buried.
Yeah. Yeah, there's especially Yolanda, and he's spiritual child of Saint Joseph because we've spoken about a few times. Yeah, so I just wanted to discuss.
Just briefly, I haven't written anything down, but I was blessed to be raised in a fairly faithful family. My mom was my Sunday school teacher and Greek language teacher and Greek dancing teacher, and my papa was the chanter, so we kind of just went to church because we had to go to church. But not that I didn't like going to church. At one point, when things were getting a little bit perhaps uninteresting, I remember my grandmother, whom I loved very much, didn't actually understand. My sister said to her, to my mom, "I don't understand the words of the service, so why should we be going to church?" And she said, "Well, neither does Yaya." And that made a really big impression on me, because I thought, oh, well, Yaya doesn't understand either, and I love Yaya. So anyway, so we're going to church, but not that it meant a whole lot to me. At the age of 19, I had a sister who was 22 who passed away with cancer. And that obviously shook the family quite in a big way. And it was at that time I was at uni, and it started to, I had to find, I suppose I was, maybe I was angry with God, or didn't really understand why things were happening to us. I also lost my dad when I was 15, so the whole family unit kind of fell apart, and I had to find answers, so I started asking a lot of questions and trying to do some reading, and it's a great blessing. I know that, I mean, you probably hear people say this too, you don't realise, but the resources for, learning your faith in English are just so unlimited now, and it wasn't like that, as Kiriakou said, when we were going through. I mean, this book, The Orthodox Church, was an amazing piece of information. We had a tiny little black liturgy book that was English and Greek on one side. That was all we had that was in English, and we had the Batarimon in English and Stable. So there was not really much available for us to understand about the church. And anyway, I started to go to some of the fellowships and the uni fellowship and whatever, and actually met Kiriakou at some of the fellowships, but we were acquaintances, and he was very shy, and I don't know, I just didn't think that we were very suitable to each other. So anyway, but he was a very, very kind man, but we were just acquaintances. And in 1984, which is way before any of you were born, seems like just yesterday, but Yolanda Yosef, who is the spiritual son of St. Joseph Isikosti, came to Australia. And if we talk about miracles in our life, that's probably the greatest miracle that ever happened to us in our life. Meeting him unworthily. I mean, there are some people in our lives that we are really unworthy to meet. And I remember going to the fellowship the first time I met him at St. George, and Yolanda spoke. And I'd never heard anybody speak like that before. It was like in the story in the Gospel where it says that, with Mary and Martha, that Mary just sat at Christ's feet and didn't want to go away from there. After I heard Yolanda speak, I didn't even know why. I just fell in love with him, and he was this old monk. I thought, what's happening to me? I just wanted to sit at his feet and listen to his feet for the rest of my life. I just was so filled with him. I can't even explain the feeling. It was just like everything he said was everything I wanted to hear about Christ and the faith and the church. And he just filled me, and I fell in love with him, literally with a divine kind of eros, and followed him everywhere that he went in Sydney. And same thing happened with Kiyoko. He started following him around too. And then we turned up at a lady's house at Earlwood, and we were invited to go after the talk. And he walked in, and I was sitting there, and he walked in, and we both said to each other rather rudely, "What are you doing here?" And it was like, oh, we didn't expect to see each other there, I guess. And after that, it was like through Yolanda's blessing that we became very good friends. And we were also very good friends with, I don't know if any of you have been to the monastery in Geelong, the Yeronisa there. She was just a layperson at the time, and we were very good friends. So the three of us became a little bit of a threesome, and we were following Yeronda everywhere he went while he was here. And he was amazing. He went to, he loved Australia, he loved the emus and the kangaroos, and he wanted to, he was really moved by the culture of the native, of the Aborigines, and he felt that there was something very deeply spiritual about them. But anyway, so Yeronda went back, and then we were left and became very close and started to pursue the church in a much sort of deeper way, I guess. And then Yeronda, who was then a layperson, decided she was going to become a nun. So she left to go to Greece and left the two of us kind of stranded. And anyway, it was a very platonic relationship at the time, but then I thought at that time, to be very honest, I actually thought I was going to become a monastic. I was so much impressed and along with Yeronda Yosif. And we were writing to him, and he was writing back to us, and I believe that he went back, yeah, he just stayed for a few weeks and then went back to Greece, to his monastery on Monathos. And then we were writing, we were writing to him, and I thought that I was going to become a nun. So after a lot of prayer, and Hirako was kind of around a lot, and we were sharing a lot of time together, but there was sort of, we were just very good friends and friends in Christ, and it was something that we prayed about, I prayed about, harder than a lot of other things I'd ever prayed for, because it was, the direction of your life, and we were all at that position in our lives. If we do genuinely love Christ, as Evan said, sometimes you feel like, well, if you're going to really love Christ, then shouldn't we all become monastics? And I actually remember Eustachio saying that to me once when he was about 14 or 15. He was just saying, if we're going to really love Christ, then shouldn't we all become monastics? And he was very worldly at that stage. It wasn't as if he was. And I said to him, that's not what God wants from all of us. So each person has a road to follow, and with prayer and with guidance from a spiritual father, I believe that we find what God wants for us. But anyway, and then through prayer and through Yeronda's blessing, maybe he was our proxenity, I don't know, we were married. So that was a big blessing. Anyway, I don't know, is that...
Yeah, I just want to say, because we were speaking beforehand, and I was kind of sharing a bit about how I came to church, and I thought, if you are going to follow Christ, isn't the monastic way the best way to do it? But like you said, there's different paths, and both of you thought at one time you were going to become monastics, and you ended up together. Do you think it was through Yeronda you realised that that's your path?
I just know that I really loved Yeronda so much, and he was such a strong man, but he was so sensitive and so pure and so real, and there was something very, very special about him. I don't even know how to explain it at the time.
So when we say Yeronda, we mean elder. So Yeronda is elder in Greek. So elder Joseph.
Yes, sorry, elder Joseph, yeah. Anyway, I mean, it was a blessing. God showed us that he didn't want us to become monastics for whatever reason, or for obvious reasons. And God blessed us with 4 children. And I think one of the things that our children have said to us is that because we were very connected with Yorongisa Kalisteni in the monastery in Geelong.
We visited her as a group actually.
Did you?
To Melbourne. So if you just came on the trip with us to Melbourne, that monastery visit with Yorongisa, the elders, Kalisteni, she spoke to us. That's who she's talking about. So they met her when she was still in the world, when she was a lay person.
Yeah, we were very good friends. And so in the summertime, at the time when we were married and we had a mortgage, we couldn't afford very expensive holidays, so we would ship the kids in the Trigo and drive down to the monastery. So we would spend a lot of our summers just playing in the Avli and with the donkeys and the sheep, and it was a bit of a country retreat. The kids used to play soccer with the nuns, and Harry, our eldest son, used to complain that it wasn't fair that Yorongisa had a raso, so she used to save the goal, Anyway, so we had a lot of fun there, and it was very down to earth and real faith, and it was very, very beautiful for the children because Yorongisa was always very loving and welcoming. So the children knew about monastic life, but we were always related and to a lot of other families, and I noticed Andrew over there when the kids were little, we were very close friends with, George. The kids used to, actually, George wasn't born yet, he was around Eleni's age, but the older three children, and they had three older children, and we had a lot of wonderful times with other families in the church, and that was really important, to have fun. To have fun in the church and for the children to grow up with that. So I don't know, one thing that my daughter said is that Mummy always said to us that there are two options in life. You can become married, you can be married and have a life in Christ, or you can become a monastic. So it wasn't as if monasticism was out of the picture. It was a real thing, but we never really encouraged our children to become monastics, it wasn't as if but then, when our son, Monasticism, went to Greece, intending to return after 3 months, it wasn't meant to be. He didn't go with the intention to stay there. He was obtaining recipes from the monks, apparently, because he loved the food that they were making. And he had intended to come back. And then...
Just like my scene with living on the boat with the frothing of the waves, that I felt no attachment. When Eustathio called me to tell me that he wasn't coming back, his words were the opposite. I can't leave this place. Yeah. So that's the difference. That was the answer to, was continuation of the other side of what I felt. I had no attachment, and on his side, he couldn't leave this place.
How was that when you heard he's not coming back? Because obviously it's your son.
I can't actually remember any other time in my life, possibly in our life, where there was so much joy and so much kind of pain at the same time. He was a boy, and he's at a male monastery where women are not allowed to visit. So it was really saying that I wouldn't ever see my son ever again. And he had two sisters that we had to tell them, and it took us a while to tell them that he wasn't coming back, because he did go with the intention to go for 3 months, and then he rang us while we were at work, and he said to his dad, Dad, he was with a trip, the others have left, I just feel like I want to stay here a little bit longer, I've got X amount of money, how many days can I stay here with that money so I don't burden the monks? So he was trying to stay as many days, squeeze as many days as possible. And then 2 weeks later we received an email to say, Dear Mum and Dad, I have found Christ, and I want to love him as much as he makes possible. As much as he makes me worthy. They were very short words, and he asked for our prayers, and it was quite a shock. And he said to us, please, in a later email, he said, please, he had some part-time work because he just finished studies, please go to my employees and tell them that I'm not coming back. He was working as a part-time barman, and I had to go to the pub and tell the guy that, well, my son's joined a monastery. It's like, oh, okay. And, you know, it was actually quite surprising because he said he was probably much more understanding than I thought he would be. He said, you didn't know your son was a philosopher. And he said he used to entertain us all with his, what do they call that thing when they throw the drinks? Anyway, the cocktails. Anyway, and he used to entertain us, tell all the young people stories, you know, attract a lot of young people, but then when everybody was gone, and, you know, at 2 or 3 in the morning, he would have stopped many people from committing suicide because he just had a way with talking to people and showing them love and compassion. And so he wasn't actually surprised, much to my surprise, that he said he was a deep thinker, and that he was. I mean, he was very social, he was very musical, he was just out there in the world. He was had a very secular life in many ways. But he left us with a recording of 4 songs because he was a musician. And one of the songs said, when you least expect it, something beautiful might happen, so you better keep your eyes open. When you least expect it, something beautiful might happen, so you better keep your mind open. And when you least expect it, something beautiful might happen, so you better keep your heart open. And I believe that he had his mind and his heart and his eyes open when he went on that trip, and God touched him. And he said to us, when Christ calls you, you can't turn your back on him, Mom. And that's exactly what happened. So we're obviously overjoyed. And he said to us, we are closer than we ever were through communion and through our faith. So we're closer than we ever were while I was here. And yeah, so
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I didn't.
Just on that point, maybe things which stand like diamonds in our lives. The last words that Katerina left him with after a couple of years he came out of Monasticism and Venezuela, and the last words she told him were, go to your joy.
I mean, he was so happy. So what does a parent want for their child? Of course you want to hug them, and he was really good to hug, like he was very affectionate, but you just want them to be happy wherever they are, and I know that's where he's meant to be, so I don't want him to be anywhere else.
So you saw him once more.
He came out after just over about a year. He was a novice, and he had one day, he had a blessing to come out. Yolanda gave a blessing for him to give us some closure, and it was just, it was like we had to pray really hard. I had to pray really hard as a mother, because how was I going to say goodbye to him? It was really difficult for me, and we prayed really hard about it, and then weren't sure what. I just thought I would be crying the whole time he was there and wouldn't be able to let him go, and he was there. We were just so happy, and he was telling us all the experiences there and everything he'd seen and the miracles he'd seen and what he'd experienced and the things that Yolanda, and you know, they call Yolanda X-ray man because he seems to just know things before you even say them to him. And he was so in love with his Yolanda, and it reminded me of the love I had for Yolanda Yosef. And you know, don't tell me that God hasn't got a plan, because of all the monasteries he visited, he was attracted to the tomb of Yolanda Yosef, which is where our, you know, initial. So anyway, I believe Yolanda was praying for him, and that's where God guided him.
I was going to say it's the same spiritual like line, yeah, because his Yolanda's the Yolanda you're flying around was his Yolanda's Yolanda.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, God has mysterious ways of working. We didn't really realize that Yerome Yosef was praying for us our whole life through. And while we had 4 children, we didn't really have much contact with him, but each time a child was born, we would write to him and ask for his blessing. But we were so busy being parents and running around trying to keep the kids out of trouble that we didn't really think about, Manathas and the monastics very much. But he was obviously praying for us, and anyway, thank God for all things.
I think it's amazing to see that relationship with the spiritual father, what it can yield in the end. Like this man, one man who's both of them had felt attached to, he's been in your life the whole time, even possibly, like most likely even after his passing, he's closer, his prayers are closer to Christ, and
That's
you
right.
can see it in your life.
That's right. One thing that our son said, like it's a miracle that he went to that monastery and he venerates the grave of Elder Joseph, of this young brother that we had contact with. That's where he's at. But one other thing that he told me that I thought was very special was that Mum, don't think anything special of me because I've decided to become a mum. That's just what I have to do to be saved. So each of us has to do our own thing to be saved, just like, we all have our own personality and all the saints have their own personalities, and we have to find what that is that God wants us to do to say wherever we're at. We don't have to become a monastic or something else. We have to just sanctify where we're at. And he was saying that this is what I have to do to be saved.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think if you think of a monk or even a nun, you think it's a quiet person would be attracted to their life, someone who's shy, and the way you're describing it. Yeah. How was he?
Sorry, I talk too much.
No, good.
He
How
really
he
was
before?
not quiet. Like, he was very contemplative. I mean, his cousins are here, they were much younger, but he was very, he was a performer. Like, he was
He was a DJ as well.
a DJ, he was a barman, but he did everything with, like, when he had a little group going just to another fellow that played guitar and sang backup vocals, and the first time he's doing a performance with his little group, he said, "Oh, Mum and Dad are going to come and hear me perform." And we thought, "Oh, where will it be at?" And he said, "Oh, at the pub." And I thought, "Oh, okay, I don't really visit pubs, But he said, "Of course we'll come. When your son asks you to come, of course you're going to go." So we turned up. It was a Sunday afternoon. It was out in the garden. It was really lovely. I thought, we haven't heard him practice anything. We thought he was going to play some really loud, kind of banging type pop music. And then he started singing all these hand-picked, incredible songs from the last 5 decades. And we were literally just in awe, and we just sat. I was crying. I was like really moved. And there were a lot of songs that I used to sing to him to put him to sleep when he was a little boy. And he said, "This one's for my mum." Oh my gosh, it was like he remembered everything. And he had a very, his voice was like honey. So, I shouldn't say that he was my son, but anyway, he just had a very sweet voice. And he was very, not quiet and not,
What you'd think for someone.
I think we have misconceived ideas about what monks and nuns are.
I don't think he was a really
We were
easy
just,
child to raise, right?
Just a little story that I remember fondly. When we were at the monastery one time.
Maybe. One of the few good things we learned from monastics is that every night they will ask forgiveness from each other. Okay, it's just the standard thing. After prayers, they will ask forgiveness from each other, first from the elder and then from everyone else. And we try to, that should be implemented in every family as well. And the children grow up like that. That forgiveness is like, end of the day. And of course during the day too. It was a standard thing. So this is Panayoti before it came.
Just a little story. We were at the monastery actually, and we had a very tiring day. And we went back to our humble hotel room, and we were trying to do our prayers, and the kids were falling asleep. Maria, our third child, was probably only about 3 or something, and he was about 4.5. And each person had their turn to say, "Forgive me, Jesus, for doing this and this and this today. Forgive me for doing this, blah, blah, blah." So we had our turn in order of age, and then Panayothi came to his turn, and he was actually, he loved his sleep, so he used to, I mean, as a monk, I don't know how he manages, but anyway, he loved his sleep, and he was really tired, and he came to his turn and he said, "Oh, Jesus, forgive me. Well, I didn't do anything wrong today, so I'm so tired, but I didn't do anything wrong today." And then Maria,
One was sleepy, right?
Maria, my other daughter, stamps her foot down. She goes, "Oh, yes, you did. Don't you remember when we were at the back of the tree and you did that?" Anyway, it was just woke everybody up, made us laugh. So, I mean, that was just something that we found as a family that really helped us and kept us together. And a little bit of self-awareness at night. I mean, they were little, what were they going to say?
Yeah.
But it's just a habit. It was a little habit. That,
It's like you plant the seed to start
Yeah.
thinking, to being
Yeah, that's
self-aware.
right.
I was going to say, because, I'm saying this genuinely not to how do you say it, to boost your egos or anything, but you have created a spiritual family and a spiritual relationship with God's help and Yolanda's help, obviously, in His prayers. Is there any advice you can give us to cultivate, first of all, a relationship with someone where it's sanctified and it's proper and it's under God and blessed, and also to have a family where you're all together in Christ? Is there anything you can, we're all youth here, but this is it's somewhere where we want to be.